Hello, this is Jonathan Wilson, pastor at Salem Covenant Church in rural Pennock, West Central Minnesota, and continuing our midweek series through the book of Revelation. Want to cover a particular issue, and that is the 144,000, which appears in chapter 7 and again in chapter 14, with possible reference to them in other places in the book. Who are these 144,000? What do they represent? What role do they play in the actions of Revelation? We turn to chapter 7, where we find that they are numbered as regiments from the tribes of Israel, 12,000 per tribe. Now, the tribes that are here listed present its own unique kind of problem. 12,000 from each of Judah, Reuben, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, Manasseh, Simeon, Levi, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. Now, these designations do not correspond with any other list given in Scripture. For example, there are the 12 sons of Jacob, but Manasseh is not a son of Jacob, and instead you would find the person of Dan, who is excluded from this list in Revelation. You also find that the tribe of Levi is included in these regiments, but Levi is not included in the list of propertied clans that muster for battle. Levi being set apart for the priestly duties concerning the tabernacle, the sacrifices, and then eventually the temple that was in Jerusalem. So the census did not then typically include the Levites when it came to mustering armies for battle. So we have those particular permutations. The only list that this fits is the list that is made in Revelation chapter 21 of the 12 gates of the New Jerusalem. So John, again, using this list of names to name the 12 gates in honor of these 12 tribes. So we have some complexity there. Why is Dan, the son of Jacob, included? Why is or excluded? Why is Manasseh, the son of Joseph, included? But then instead of naming Ephraim as the other, Ephraim's father Joseph is named. So these are some complexities that that force us to ask some questions about what is intended here and what is meant. Now, there are a number of opinions regarding what these 144,000 are supposed to represent. Some suggest that they are a perfect number, but that really they represent the entire multitude without number that appears later in chapter 7, that fills heaven, the number of all the redeemed saints, Jewish and Gentile alike. But then we find that this same number appears in Revelation chapter 14. And this is how they are described. John is speaking. Then I looked, and there before me was the Lamb, capital L, referring to Jesus Christ, standing on Mount Zion. That is the location of Jerusalem in Israel. And with him 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. Well, we know from chapter 7 that the 144,000 were sealed in order to escape the destructions of the judgments that had come. And I heard a sound from heaven like the roar of rushing waters and like a loud peal of thunder. The sound I heard was like that of harpists playing their harps. And they sang a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and the elders. So are these the harpists singing before the throne? And where exactly is this Mount Zion and the 144,000? Some will argue that this is in reference to Mount Zion and the location of Jerusalem as it is taking shape in heaven. Others suggest that no, this is in fact the ridge in what is Israel, the Holy Land on our earth. No one could learn the song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. Well, here we have a suggestion that perhaps then somehow earth and heaven are at an intersection in a particular and unique way. And that would be, of course, true of Mount Zion, since Jerusalem had been the location of the temple and therefore remained holy ground, even though the temple itself had been destroyed by the Roman legions in the year 70 AD. Going on to explain who these 144,000 are, these are those who did not defile themselves with women, for they kept themselves pure. They follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They were purchased from among men and offered as first fruits to God and the Lamb. No lie was found in their mouths. They are blameless. This again has arguments being made by scholars of various points of view, continuing on the premise that Revelation is intended to reveal and not conceal, that the name of the book is not concealment, it is revelation, that the name of the book is not secrets to unpack, but God's word to rescue us for salvation. That we have some clues that suggest to me who these 144,000 are. And so I'm just going to cut to the chase and then build the case. And that is that I believe that these 144,000 do represent the saved remnant from Israel. That these 144,000 represent the perfection of Jewish believers in Jesus who are saved over time. Now, does this mean that there will be only 144,000? I do not think that that is what is suggested here at all. But there are a number of reasons why I believe that this is representative of the saved Jewish people versus the entire saved community. And one of these indications is that even though there is no reference to the tribal divisions in chapter 14, there is the suggestion of what role these persons are playing. It says, "These are those who did not defile themselves with women, for they kept themselves pure." Now, there will be some argument about what is meant by the Greek word parthenoi, which is translated here, kept themselves pure, but when applied to a young woman, such as Mary in the New Testament, the word means virgin. Well, when parthenoi is applied to a young woman, in Israel in the New Testament, it is synonymous with virgin. Undefiled would mean for an unmarried woman that she is virgin. But to married men, what would the word mean? They kept themselves from women, they kept themselves pure. Does this suggest that these 144,000 in their regiments under the banner of those patriarchal names, Asher and Gad and so on, that they were keeping themselves virginal? And in fact, scholars agree that that does not necessarily need to be the case. And in fact, I find it highly unlikely. The reference here is to the rule that David had made when he was king about 1000 BC, that in preparation for fighting battle, the troops with him should keep themselves from women. They should not be with their wives sexually on the eve of battle, so that they go into the battle having consecrated themselves to that degree. It is a way of expressing faith, of expressing commitment. And so that is what David required of his own forces, going all the way back to when he was an outlaw running from Saul. When he had a band of between 400 and 600 soldiers following him, going with him wherever he went. When it came to the eve of battle, then that rule would be in place. That becomes especially significant when David himself does not go out with his men to the battle, stays in Jerusalem, and then commits adultery with the wife of one of his captains who was out in the field. His name was Uriah. And that story is told in the book of 2 Samuel, chapter 11. Now, when Uriah's wife, Bathsheba, gets pregnant, she sends word to David. David recalls Uriah from the field to Jerusalem and sends him home in order to conceal the fact that the child was not Uriah's but his own, thinking that Uriah would be seduced in this manner. But Uriah stuck to the principles that David had set forward. And so Uriah did not go home. He slept in the gatehouse of David's palace. And so even though David tried all kinds of maneuvers, Uriah was adamant that he would not share that kind of comfort when he had his comrades out in the field. In this way, heaping shame upon shame when it came to David's own approach. Well, we have in Jesus Christ, the Son of David, the Messianic heir of David, a true and sinless Christ, a true and sinless Messiah, for he is also the Son of God. And so he is not guilty of those crimes that David committed, but the code of conduct that David had implemented for his army continues to be in effect as far as Jesus is concerned when he takes on this kind of messianic role. So what we find then is that these 144,000 are those representing the saved remnant of Israel, people who kept themselves pure during the struggle with temptation, during the struggle with all the bag of tricks that the beast is throwing at them. They are the ones who out from among Israel and the Jewish people, in following Jesus of Nazareth, keep the faith in Jesus and are not defiled. Then we have a particular reference to what being undefiled by women may mean as we look further into the story and find that starting in chapter 17, the great whore is described, and she is described as the whore of Babylon, as one who sits on top of the beast, and sort of rides the beast along to her own power, to her own wealth, and her own kind of glory. And it is a very seductive kind of glory because it is the glory of the wealth of cities. It is the glory of the merchant markets, the marketplace, where money makes the world go round. And these things become very clear in chapter 17 and 18, as it is described that the kings of the earth commit, quote, adultery, unquote, with this woman of Babylon. And so it's the kings of the earth, but not only them, it's ship captains, it's financiers, it's everyone sort of tied into that global economy, that global system, that whose strings are pulled by the beast. That by doing that, they are committing adultery. And we find that these 144,000, by being undefiled, by keeping themselves from women, that they are ones who rejected the values of the global marketplace. They refused to worship the silver, to bow down to prosperity. Let prosperity be a blessing from God, and use it to advance the witness to righteousness. But do not worship prosperity. Do not make it a means to one's own ends. And then it becomes a function of stewardship rather than a trap for the soul. So this is why I believe that the 144,000 stand uniquely for the Jewish remnant that in generation after generation are called apart to faith in Jesus Christ. And in that way, they stand under the banners of the patriarchs of Israel. So then why not Dan? Why not name Ephraim and instead have Ephraim swallowed up by the name of Joseph? And this could be a reference to the idolatries of the northern kingdom after Israel broke apart into two kingdoms. There was the kingdom that followed after the descendants of David, centered in Jerusalem, and then there was the kingdom that broke away. And in breaking away, they had done so at God's command and at God's promise. But as soon as they broke away, the first of those kings, Jeroboam, settled. He was an Ephraimite himself, and he made his capital city in Ephraim, where it remained for Israel ever since. But one of his first actions was to lead those tribes with him into idolatry. And so it could be that by removing Ephraim's name and letting that name be taken up by Ephraim's father, Joseph, the son of Jacob, that is a suggestion that that kind of idolatry, that kind of participation in the golden calves of Jeroboam, exempt or take Ephraim out of the honor of having the banners of the regiments named for him, and also the foundation or the gate of the New Jerusalem. The same would apply to the tribe of Dan, which was actually the first to really create a sort of permanent idolatrous distraction. And that is described in the book of Judges, chapters 20 and 21. And in that idolatrous distraction, Dan, located on the far north frontier of Israel, becomes a pariah, perhaps, to those that are carrying forward the lamps of faith. In fact, their distraction of idolatry is so long-standing and so permanent that when Jeroboam sets up his idol stations, he sets up one in his own capital city, the other he puts in the city of Dan, far to the north, because the Danites there were already used to idol worship. And so he sets one of his golden calves up there. So that is why we have Dan and Ephraim perhaps excluded from the list, the rest of the tribes and patriarchs included in the list. And what we find here then is that this is part of fulfilling the promises of glory to Israel. That these promises from the Old Testament and so on about Israel's special place in God's plan of salvation is never abrogated. It is never taken away. Yes, salvation is in Jesus Christ. One must repent of one's sins and follow him. But God in every generation calls apart that faithfulness, and has done so even throughout the idolatries of the Old Testament. And so Elijah, in his despair that no one is faithful anymore in all the northern kingdom, the kingdom established by Rehoboam, and he's there at Mount Sinai sulking, and God says to him, no, you get up, get back into your ministry, because I have called apart 7,000 who have never kneeled to the Baals. So this is God's handiwork throughout the Old Testament, throughout the New, and throughout our times until the time of the end. There will always be that unique place where the remnant of Israel is a special vessel through which salvation comes to all the earth. And that is why this 144,000 is set apart from the great multitude. That there are two distinct pictures. There's 144,000 that are part of the great multitude, but are identified as something special within it and apart from it. So those are my conclusions. Now, what part do they have in the end time battle? In chapter 14, we have them there, and this is after all the trials and tribulations brought by the beast in every generation. And here they stand on Mount Zion, following the Lamb wherever he goes. In chapter 15, there is a song of the Lamb and of Moses that is sung, and this may be a description then of the new song that is learned by these 144,000. From there, we don't see that they are specifically part of things after that, although there is in chapter 19 a description that Jesus gallops to Armageddon with the armies of heaven behind him. And I want to pick up on that particularly. We will be getting more into that when we describe chapter 19 and study that. But I think it is important for us to understand that these 144,000 consecrated, each standing in the banners of their regiment under the 12 tribes of Israel, that these are primarily overcomers. They are primarily conquerors by their witness, not by their weapons. It is not that they have fought battles with flesh and blood, that they have overcome, that they have conquered. That was true of David's armies in the Old Testament. Their battles were with flesh and blood. These battles are with spiritual powers and principalities, and these have overcome by walking in the way of the Lamb. And so it is described that they were purchased and offered as first fruits to God and the Lamb, purchased from among men. So redeemed by the Lamb, their own blood then shed in faithfulness as they follow the Lamb wherever he goes, including to and through the cross and into the promise of the resurrection. So it is primarily as witnesses that these 144,000 overcome. It is not by weapons. It is not by war with flesh and blood. Not only is that true of them, it is true of all the armies of heaven. We have specific instances where angels are called to wrestle with devils and overcome them. But we do not see where human beings riding with the armies of Jesus Christ or serving Jesus are called into acts of violence. The violence is always done by the beast and his allies. That's where the violence comes from. The victory is always the power of God. And we will find that that will be true in chapter 19 and in chapter 20 as the final victories over the beast and the false prophet and the devil himself bring an end to earthly history and inaugurate the new heavens, the new earth, and the new Jerusalem. I hope you'll join me as we continue in these studies.